My sister got the email about our grandmother's estate. I got a text from my mother that said, "Don't come to the reading. Your presence will complicate things, and your aunt's lawyer doesn't want strangers in the room." I read that word 3 times. Strangers. I had cleaned that woman's bathroom for the last 2 years of her life. I had driven 90 minutes every Sunday to change her dressings and refill her pill organizer and argue with her about why she couldn't keep skipping her heart medication. But to my mother, on the day the money got divided, I was a stranger. I put the phone face down on my workbench and went back to the harness I was rewiring. That's what I do. I'm an industrial electrician. 40 hours a week, I'm in a plant out past the river, pulling conduit and troubleshooting motor controls. And on weekends, I do side jobs because the side jobs are mine and nobody can take a cut of them. My hands are the only honest thing in my whole family, and I'm including myself in that. Stay with me because the next part is where it all turns. The day after that text, my mother and my older brothers showed up at my apartment, and standing behind them was a man I had never met. And what that man said in my doorway is the reason my brother hasn't been able to look me in the eye since. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name is Marlowe. I'm 31. I grew up in a town in central Ohio that you've driven past on the interstate without slowing down. The kind of place where the water tower has the high school mascot painted on it, and everybody's dad worked at the same plant until the plant left. We didn't leave when it left. A lot of families did. Mine stayed, and my father took whatever work he could get, and my mother decided somewhere along the way that we were going to be respectable even if we weren't going to be rich, and that respectability was a thing you performed for the neighbors. I have an older brother. His name is Desmond, and from the time he could walk, he was the one the performance was built around. Desmond was smart in the way that gets noticed. He skipped a grade. He gave the speech at his 8th grade graduation. My mother kept his report cards in a folder in the good drawer in the dining room, the drawer that also held the photos and the insurance papers, and she would take that folder out when company came over. I was not in the folder. I was the other one. Not dumb, just different. I liked taking things apart. When I was 9, I unscrewed the back of the broken box fan in the garage because I wanted to see why it had stopped, and I found a wire that had come loose from its little metal tab. And I twisted it back and the fan ran. I was so proud, I carried it into the kitchen to show her, this dusty fan trailing its cord, and she looked at the grease on my hands and told me to go wash up before I touched anything. She never asked how I fixed it. Desmond had gotten a ribbon at the science fair that same week for a poster about volcanoes, a poster I had helped him glue together, and that ribbon went on the refrigerator. The fan went back in the garage. That's the whole story of my childhood, honestly. One of us got ribbons for posters, and one of us got told to go wash her hands. When it came time for college, Desmond went. Full ceremony about it. My parents took out a loan. My mother worked the phones telling everyone he'd gotten into the business program, and they put a sticker on the back window of the car. I said I wanted to do the electrical program at the Career Center instead, the 2-year one that fed into an apprenticeship, and my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and told me, gently, like she was explaining something to a slow child, that she wasn't going to brag to the Hendersons about a daughter who fixed wires. So I didn't ask them for anything. I did the program. I paid for my own tools, a little at a time, off a part-time job at the hardware store, and I still have some of those first tools, the cheap ones, in the bottom of my big rolling chest, because throwing them out feels like throwing out the person who bought them when she had nothing. I got my journeyman card at 23. By 26, I was the only woman on a crew of 11, and the guys had stopped testing me, which on a job site is the highest compliment there is. I made good money. Not lawyer money, but the kind of money where if your transmission goes, you don't lie awake about it. I bought a little place. I built a life with my own 2 hands the same way I'd fix anything else. Find the broken part, replace it, move on. And the whole time, my family treated me like the spare key, the one you don't think about until you're locked out. You want to know the thing that still gets me? It's not the big stuff, it's the small stuff. It's that every single time something broke in that house, I was the first call. The furnace cut out the week of Christmas. I drove home and bled the lines in the dark. The breaker panel started tripping every time my mother ran the dryer and the microwave together. I came over and balanced the load and replaced two breakers that were the original 1980s units, and frankly a fire waiting to happen. I rewired the back porch light. I replaced the disposal. I put a GFCI in the bathroom because the old outlet by the sink terrified me every time I saw it. I never sent a bill. You don't bill family. That's what I told myself. But here's what I figured out later, and it took me too long. They didn't think of it as me helping. They thought of it as me being useful. There's a difference, and the difference is whether they'd ever do it back. Desmond once called me from a parking lot because his check engine light came on and he was scared to drive, and I talked him through it on the phone for 40 minutes. And at the end he said thanks and then immediately told me about a promotion he'd gotten and how he and his wife were looking at a bigger house. He never once asked what I was working on. In my whole adult life, I don't think my brother has asked me a single question about my actual life. Okay. So, my grandmother on my mother's side was named Opaline, and everybody called her Opal, and she was the only person in that family who ever looked at me straight. She'd been a switchboard operator and then a bookkeeper for a trucking company, and she had no patience for my mother's performances. When I was a teenager and my mother said something cutting about my hands at the dinner table, it was Opal who said, "Across the turkey, those hands will be feeding you long after his diploma's yellowed in a drawer," and pointed her fork at Desmond, and the table went quiet. And I loved her so much in that moment I could have cried. When Opal got sick, it was the lungs first and then the heart. The family did what my family does. They organized, by which I mean they had a meeting, on the phone, that I was looped into at the end of, where it was decided that since I had a flexible schedule and no children, I would be the one to look after her. I want to be clear, I wasn't angry about it. I wanted to. There was nobody on this earth I'd rather have spent those Sundays with. But I noticed, the way you notice a hairline crack in a casting, that it was decided I would do it because my time was considered worth less. Desmond had a family and a career. I just had wires. So for 2 years, I drove to Opal's every Sunday and a lot of Wednesdays too when it got bad. I learned to do the dressings on her leg. I set up the pill organizer with the days of the week, and I called the pharmacy when the insurance fought us, and I sat on hold for 2 hours one time and missed a side job that would have paid $400, and I didn't care. Because Opal would tell me stories about the trucking company and the men who tried to cheat the books and how she caught every one of them. She'd hold my hand with her papery one and she'd say, "You're the only one who comes. You know that. You're the only one who comes." I'd say, "Desmond comes," and she'd give me a look. Desmond came on holidays for an hour, and he'd stand by the door with his coat on the whole time like he was double parked. Near the end, she started talking about her papers. She kept everything in a fireproof box in her closet, a gray metal thing with a little key, and she told me more than once, "It's all in order, Marlowe. I keep it all in order, you'll see." I thought she was just being an old bookkeeper. I didn't think anything of it. "I want you to remember," she said that. "It's all in order. You'll see." She passed in March. I was there. I held her hand and I told her it was okay to go, and she went. Easy. Just stopped. Like a motor coasting down when you cut the power. I was the one who called the others. My mother cried on the phone in a way that I would later understand was at least partly about logistics. And then 4 days after the funeral, I got the text. "Don't come to the reading. Your presence will complicate things. Stranger." Here's the part I keep coming back to. I almost didn't fight it. That's the thing about being raised as the spare key. You get so used to being left out that being left out doesn't even register as wrong. It just registers as Sunday. I read that text and my honest first feeling, was a kind of tired shrug. Of course they don't want me there. I went back to my workbench and I rewired that harness and I told myself it didn't matter. It was the next morning that they came. I was off that day. I was on my second coffee, standing at my kitchen counter in a flannel and wool socks, and I heard a car pull up too fast on my street, and then a second one, and I looked out the window and there was my mother's sedan parked crooked and my brother's SUV behind it, and the two of them coming up my walk like they were serving a warrant, and behind them a third person. A man in a good coat, older, gray at the temples, carrying a slim leather folder under his arm. I didn't recognize him. He didn't look angry the way they did. He looked careful. I opened the door before they could knock. My mother started before I had it all the way open. "You called the lawyer," she said. "Not a question. An accusation. You went behind our backs and you called Mr. Castellan, and now everything is a mess, Marlowe, everything." I had no idea who Mr. Castellan, and now everything is a mess, Marlowe, everything. Castellan was. "I said so, don't," Desmond said. He had his arms crossed. He had on the kind of quarter-zip pullover that costs more than my good boots. "Don't play dumb, the reading got stopped. He says he can't proceed without you in the room. So whatever you said to him, you can unsay it, because Mom's counting on—" "I didn't call anybody," I said. And the man behind them, the one in the good coat, said quietly, "She didn't." Everybody turned. He stepped up, not pushing, just stepping, the way a man does when he's used to rooms going quiet for him. "I'm Aldous Castellan," he said to me. "I was your grandmother's attorney for 31 years. I'm sorry to arrive at your door like this. I tried to reach you by mail, but I gather some of the correspondence was redirected." He didn't look at my mother when he said that, which was somehow worse than if he had. "May I come in? This won't take long, and frankly it'll save us all a great deal of trouble." I stood back and let him in. My mother and brother came in behind him like they'd been invited, which they had not been. We sat at my little table, the one I built from a reclaimed bowling lane I bought off a guy for $40. Castellan set his leather folder down and opened it, and on top was a document I recognized even upside down because Opal had let me see it once. The fireproof box. He'd had a copy too. "Your grandmother," Castellan said, "was a meticulous woman. In 31 years, I never once had to chase her for a document." He looked at me. "She updated her will 14 months ago. I drove out to her home to do it because she no longer drove. Do you know who let me in that day?" I didn't say anything. "You did," he said. "You'd come to do her dressing. You made me a cup of coffee and you went back to the kitchen and you gave us our privacy, and you have no idea what we discussed, do you?" I shook my head. My mother had gone very stiff next to me. "Mr. Rode, Castellan," she said, and her voice had gone into the bright social register she used for the Hendersons. "I really think this is a conversation for the proper setting, with everyone." "Everyone is here," he said, without raising his voice at all. "That's rather the point. Your mother named you executor, Marlowe." The word didn't mean anything to me for a second. Then it did. "She named you executor of her estate," Castellan went on, "and she was quite specific about why. She told me, I wrote it down, because she asked me to. She wanted it in the file. She said, Marlowe is the only one who showed up. The rest of them will show up now." He looked, for the first time, directly at my mother and my brother. "And here you are." Nobody said anything. The refrigerator hummed. "There's more," he said, "and you're entitled to hear it privately, but given that your family has driven here this morning under what I understand is a misapprehension, I think clarity serves everyone." He turned a page. "The estate is not large by some standards, but your grandmother was, as I said, meticulous. She owned her home outright. She had a brokerage account she opened in 1986 and never touched, dividends reinvested for nearly 40 years. And she had a life insurance policy that she kept current to the month she died." He named a number. I won't tell you the number, but I watched my brother's face do something I'd never seen it do. I watched it go slack. "The home," Castellan continued, "she left to you, Marlowe. The brokerage account is divided, and here she was specific. 60% to you, 20% to your mother, 20% to your brother. The life insurance proceeds are yours alone. And there's a letter." He took out a sealed envelope with my name on it in Opal's shaky hand. "She asked that you read it after in private. I'll honor that." "This is insane," Desmond said. His voice cracked on it. "She wasn't. Mom, she wasn't in her right mind. She was on all that medication. She was sharper than you," Castellan said. "And it wasn't cruel. It was just flat, the way a wall is flat. I administered the cognitive screening myself, with a physician present, because I anticipated this exact conversation. Your grandmother anticipated it too. She used the phrase, he glanced at his notes, they'll say I was confused. She was not confused. She was the least confused person I have met in 40 years of practice. My mother had stopped performing. That was the thing I noticed. The bright register was gone. She was looking at the table, at my $40 bowling lane table, and her mouth was working a little, and I realized she was doing math. She was sitting in her daughter's kitchen doing the math of how much she had just not gotten, and she could not hide it. And for the first time in my entire life, I saw my mother clearly. There was no performance left to see her through. There was just a woman who had spent 31 years keeping one daughter in a folder and the other in the garage, and who had just been told in writing by her own dead mother exactly what that was worth. You did this, she said to me, quiet, venomous. You worked her. 2 years of Sundays, you worked her like a don't, Castellan said. And this time there was something underneath the flatness, something that made even her stop. I have known a great many people who worked the elderly, Mrs. He used my mother's name, and I won't repeat it here, and they do not spend 2 years doing wound care. They do not sit on hold with Medicare. They visit twice, charmingly, and they ask about the will. I have watched your daughter on 3 separate occasions, and not once did she so much as glance at that fireproof box. Your mother saw the same thing I did, so no. She was not worked. She was, for once in her life, simply paid attention to, and she returned the favor. I have replayed that man's voice in my head 100 times since. He didn't yell. He never once yelled. He just said the true thing, plainly, in my kitchen, and the true thing did all the work that yelling never could. Desmond stood up. He put his hands flat on my table and leaned on them, and I thought for a second he was going to flip it, and then I saw he was just trying not to fall down. I'm her grandson, he said, to nobody. I gave this speech at her at Kells, and he couldn't finish it, because there wasn't an end to that sentence that was true. He always gave the speech. He always stood by the door with his coat on. He always told her about his coat on. He always told her about his promotion and then looked at his watch. You can contest it, Castellan said, gathering his folder. That's your right. I'll tell you as a courtesy that you'll lose and that the estate your sister's estate now, as executor will bill the contest against your share. Your grandmother thought of that too. He stood. He buttoned his coat. And then he did the thing that I think actually broke my brother, because it was so small. He turned to me and he put out his hand and he said, "It was a genuine pleasure to finally meet you properly, Marlowe. Your grandmother spoke of you for an hour. She didn't mention either of them once." I shook his hand. My hands were rough and his were soft, and he didn't flinch at the difference. He just shook my hand like a person shakes another person's hand. He let himself out. I heard his careful footsteps down my walk, and a car door, and then nothing. My mother and my brother sat in my kitchen for another minute. I think they were waiting for me to do something. To gloat, maybe. Or to cry, or to offer them coffee and smooth it all over the way I always smooth everything over, the way I'd bled the furnace lines in the dark and balanced the load on the panel and never sent a bill. I didn't do any of it. You should go, I said. Marlowe. My mother tried the bright voice one more time, reaching for it like a tool that had always worked before. We're family. Whatever your grandmother, she was old. She got ideas. We can sit down, the 3 of us, and we can divide this fairly, the way she'd really have wanted. She wrote down the way she wanted it, I said. Mr. Castellan read it to you. It's in order. And I heard myself say it, and I felt the back of my neck go hot, because that was Opal's word. It's all in order, you'll see. She'd been telling me for 2 years. I just hadn't understood that being in order meant being in my name. They left. Desmond went first, fast, not looking at me, already on his phone, probably calling his wife, probably calling a lawyer who would tell him the same thing Castellan had. My mother stopped in the doorway. For a second I thought she might say something real, some last thing, after 31 years. That would be true. She said, "The furnace has been making a sound." That's it. That's what she said. The furnace has been making a sound. She disinherited me in every way that mattered for 3 decades. She drove to my house to accuse me of theft, and then on her way out the door, she told me the furnace was making a sound because somewhere in her, under everything, I was still the spare key. I was still the one you call when something breaks. I said, "Call somebody," and I closed the door. I didn't open Opal's letter for 2 days. I'm not sure why. I think part of me was afraid it would be instructions, a list, one more set of things to fix. When I finally sat down with it, on the Sunday I would have been driving to her, I made the kind of coffee she liked, too strong, and I opened it. It wasn't long. Her handwriting got worse toward the end, and I had to hold it to the light. She wrote that she knew what they'd say about her, and she didn't care. That she'd spent 84 years caring what people said, and she decided she was done. She wrote that the house had good bones and I'd know what to do with it, which was a joke because of course I'd know what to do with it. I'd already rewired half of it for free. She wrote that the money in the brokerage account was 40 years of a bookkeeper quietly putting away what nobody noticed, and wasn't that funny? That the one nobody noticed had the most to give. And at the bottom she wrote, "They'll come around or they won't. Don't you dare hold the door open waiting. Build your own table. Set a place for whoever shows up. You'll be surprised who does." I sold the brokerage shares slowly, the way she'd held them, no rush. I kept her house. I didn't move in. My little place was mine and I loved it, but I fixed her house up properly, the way it deserved, and I rent the downstairs now to a young couple. He's a welder, she's in nursing school. And they pay me on time, and we have coffee on the porch sometimes, and he asks me about my work and I ask him about his. And that, it turns out, is most of what I'd been missing my whole life. Somebody asking about the work. Desmond didn't contest it. I heard through a cousin that his lawyer told him the same thing Castellan did, and that it would cost more to lose than to walk away. I heard he and his wife didn't get the bigger house after all. I'm not glad about that. I want to be the kind of person who's not glad about that, and most days I am. My mother calls about 4 times a year now. Always when something breaks. I helped her find an electrician the first time, a good one, gave her a name. The second time I gave her the same name. By the 4th call, she stopped asking me to come and started just telling me, "The way you tell the weather, that things were breaking over there. The dishwasher, the garage door, the porch light I'd put in myself a decade ago." I think it's the closest she can come to saying she misses having me to call. I don't drive out. I send the name of the electrician. He's good. He sends a bill. It's been a little over a year now. This past Sunday I had people at Opal's house, the welder and his wife from downstairs, 2 guys off my crew and their families, the old man from the hardware store where I bought my first tools, who's retired now and lonely and lights up like a Christmas tree when you put a plate in front of him. We ate in Opal's dining room at a table big enough for all of us, and somebody told a story about a job gone wrong, and we all laughed until the windows rattled, and I sat there with grease I hadn't quite gotten out from under my thumbnail wrapped around a coffee cup. And I thought about the box fan. The dusty box fan, and the 9-year-old carrying it into the kitchen with her hands full of proof, and the woman who told her to go wash up. I don't carry the proof in anymore. I stopped needing somebody to look at my hands and tell me they were good. They're good. They built all of this. They held Opal's hand at the end, and they shook Castellan's at the table, and they're holding this coffee right now in a house full of people who showed up. She was right. I was surprised who did. If you've ever been the spare key in your own family, the one they only call when something's broken, I want you to hear the thing it took me 31 years and a dead grandmother to learn. You are allowed to stop answering. You are allowed to build your own table. And the people who are meant to sit at it will not care what's under your fingernails. They'll just be glad you saved them a seat. Tell me where you're watching from. And tell me who in your life is the one who actually shows up. The thing I keep turning over, even now, is how long I let other people decide what my hands were worth. For 31 years I let my mother file my brother under promising and file me under useful, and I never once stopped to check her math. Opal checked it. She sat in that house every Sunday and watched who actually walked through the door, and she did the one thing nobody else in my family ever bothered to do. She paid attention. That's the whole engine of how this ended. Cause and effect. They treated me like a tool, so they only ever called when something broke. I treated Opal like a person, so I was there when nothing was broken at all. Just her, needing company. The will didn't reward me for being lovable. It rewarded me for showing up again and again. When showing up cost me money and Sundays and got me nothing back but a story about a trucking company. Effort that nobody claps for is still effort. It still counts. Somebody is always keeping the real ledger, even when it isn't the people you're trying to impress. I think about Desmond leaning on my table, trying not to fall down, and I don't feel triumphant about it. I feel something closer to sad, because he was smart, genuinely smart, and he spent all that intelligence figuring out how to look good instead of how to be good. And in the end, the smartest move would have been the simplest one. Sit down. Take off the coat. Ask the old woman a question and mean it. He never learned to read the room that mattered. Being clever and being wise are not the same thing, and the gap between them is exactly the size of how much you're willing to notice other people. What I tell anyone who's ever been the spare key is this: don't wait for permission to value yourself, because the people who diminished you are the last ones who'll ever hand it over. Keep doing the right thing even when there's no audience and no ribbon and no folder in the good drawer with your name in it. Do it because it's who you are, not because someone's watching. Learn to see clearly, see which people show up and which ones only call when the furnace knocks. And then have the backbone to act on what you see, even when acting on it means closing a door on the very people you spent your whole life holding it open for. Goodness without the nerve to back it up just makes you easy to use. I had to learn all three the hard way, on a Sunday alone with a letter. Build your own table, set the places yourself, and stop, finally, waiting to be invited to a chair you already paid for.